A very warm welcome to the webinar From Local to Global, Strengthening Cooperation for a Just Energy Transition. My name is Andrzej Bochowicz. I am Managing Director of Climate Strategies, which is an organization that brings together research and action on various aspects of energy and climate policy. So just transition, energy transformation are one of the key aspects of our work. This webinar is co-hosted by Climate Strategies and the Bilateral Institute, and I wanted to acknowledge funding from the German Federal Ministry of Environment and the European Commission. Thank you very much indeed for this. Now, what is the purpose of our meeting today? The purpose is to explore the practicalities of international collaboration. It's a typical buzzword that you hear in many meetings, but really wanted to go to the details, what it means for various topical exchanges, for geographical exchanges, for South-North collaboration and discussions. So we want to really go into details of that. And the particular example of that international collaboration is the South Africa Just Energy Transition Partnership, and that will be a little bit of, we'll zoom in on that during our event. As you know, this was announced at the COP26, and I would say the entire energy transition community is wondering, is it a blueprint? Can we replicate that? So we'll hear from speakers from South Africa, but also other countries about that. So can we have the slide now with the agenda? You'll see the agenda has two parts. And the first part is the session where you will receive lots of information, but lots of very exciting information. So we'll hear from speakers from Germany, Colombia, India, Indonesia, Mexico. I hope I haven't omitted anybody. And that session will be facilitated by Megan Rowling, who is the Just Transition Editor at Thomson Reuters Foundation. Thanks very much for that. If we can have, so this is roughly an hour. And then we can have the slide with the second session. And I really, really, really ask everybody, please do stay for session 2, because those two sessions are interlinked and they make the offered package a comprehensive and full package. And the session will be kicked off by Timon Venner from Wuppertal Institute, and he'll present the Global Just Transition Toolbox for Coal Regions, very interesting new publication. And then we'll go to an interactive session where we'll ask you for reflection, first individual, then in pairs, and then in larger groups, and that will be facilitated by Julian Hogbin, my colleague from Climate Strategies. A few remarks on technical matters. I mean, first of all, as I said, please stay with us for the second session. However, if you already know you can't, let us know, because that would allow us to plan better for the breakout rooms. Please note the event is being recorded, so we are planning to publish it on our YouTube channel, website, so that you can share it with colleagues, rewatch, relive the experience. We are not planning to have a formal Q&A, so the part 2 is meant to serve as this reflection part, the part that you can digest and discuss in smaller groups. However, please do use the chat. If you want to comment on something, if you want to share something, if you have, I don't know, a different initiative that is linked to what you're hearing, please do post and share. We'll capture that. Yeah, I think it will be to the benefit of building that community. And one last request is, if you can in your Zoom, please obviously state your name there, but also your institution, your organization, so that I think it also allows people to connect better. With that, without further ado, I only exceeded my, I think, time allocated by 1 minute. I'm going to hand over to Megan to guide us through session 1. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrzej. Yes, my name is Megan Rowling. Welcome, everybody. I am a climate correspondent and Just Transition editor for the Thomson Reuters Foundation. I don't know if you're familiar with TRF, but we are the charitable part of Reuters News. And we cover a range of topics, basically focused around human rights, the human impact of climate change, technology, inclusive economies. And so since, well, a few months now, we've been working on ramping up our coverage of just transition. and this is a global effort. We have received funding for this from a donor, a philanthropic donor. So this is helping considerably. And at the moment, we have correspondents in India and Brazil and Bangladesh who are focused on this topic, but we're also using our network of correspondents around the world, from Europe to Africa to the Americas and Asia, in order to track what's happening with the Just Transition agenda and basically report on what we think is so far an emerging topic, but one that's likely to become much bigger, we feel, in the coming years, especially with the growing focus on inequality that we've been seeing worldwide, and the need for a green transition to basically get to grips with it and make sure that the switch away from fossil fuels doesn't exacerbate problems with poverty, exclusion, and so on. So I'm really excited to be here today and have such an amazing range of speakers. And our focus has for many years been on developing countries, and I think this is going to be absolutely essential in terms of learning between global South nations, and although Just Transition is a very specific context-specific concept, I'm sure there are many ways that countries can cooperate and make it a fairer and an easier process for everybody. So as we have many speakers today, I'm going to quickly introduce everybody, and then we will hear from our speakers in turn. And I hope we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the event for me to pick up on a couple of key themes. And as Andres said, we won't be having a Q&A in this part of the event because we would be pressed for time, but there should be plenty of discussion in the second part of the workshop. So just to tell you who we will have speaking, first of all, we'll hear from Stuart Mangold, who is the Director for Africa and Bilateral Relations at the Department of Environmental Affairs, South Africa. He'll be followed by Annegret Al-Janabi, who's the Senior Policy Officer in the Unit for Climate Finance in Germany's Federal Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development. Then I hope we will have Dudu Sibia, who is the Manager of the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environmental Affairs for, sorry, I always have trouble pronouncing this, Mpumalanga in South Africa, which is one of the main coal hubs, which will be facing a Just Transition, although Dudu, I think, is having a little bit of trouble with the microphone, so hopefully that will be fixed by the time we come to you. After that, we'll hear from Indonesia, from Fabi Tumiwa, who is Executive Director of the Institute for Essential Services Reform there. And then we'll hear from India, from Sretha Banerjee, who's Director of the India Just Transition Center. And then we'll also hear from Latin America. We will have Alex Saya, I hope, from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia, and also Ana Tamboro, who's the Just Transition Manager for the Iniciativa Climática de México. So we will begin with South Africa. As Andres said, everybody is absolutely sort of on tenterhooks waiting to see how this South Africa Just Energy Transition Partnership that was announced at COP26 is going to play out in the next few years. It's a lot of money, $8.5 billion over the next 3 to 5 years to support South Africa's just transition. So if we could start with Stuart Mangold, please, Stuart, could you tell us a little bit about how things have progressed so far and where you see this heading, especially, at the beginning of this partnership, and how that's going to be kind of bedded down with the input being led by South African institutions and other stakeholders. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Megan, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some colleagues in the East. My name is Stuart Mangold. I'm with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa. Let me start off on the onset to say I'm not an expert in just transition, but it is a pleasure to be with you today and to share some of the experiences and some of the perspectives from the South African government. So I'll just start off by introducing the topic from our perspective, and also to thank Climate Strategies for the invitation to share some of the insights on the Just Transition Framework for South Africa. As we all know, the UN Secretary General has described the climate emergency as the defining issue of our time, and arguing that shocks resulting from climate change not only negatively impact on the environment, which we depend, but they also weaken or potentially have an influence on our political, economic, and social systems. Also of concern, of course, is that the climate crisis is no longer confined to multilateral institutions or the non-governmental sector. For example, the World Economic Forum's annual Global Risk Perception Survey identified climate action failure, extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem collapse as some of the top 3 of the 10 global risks by severity over the next decade. The South African government, of course, is very cognizant of this, and in considering the climate risk in our own national context, has identified 2 categories of risk in order for our economy and our society to prosper. First of all is the risk, is the physical risk. As scientific evidence indicates that sub-Saharan Africa is particularly vulnerable to climate change, like many places in the world, but is actually warming at twice the global average rate. This is, of course, deeply concerning for the whole of the Southern African region, and of course for South Africa as well. This means that the increases already started to progress faster than in many other regions. Apart from the temperature increase, of course, climate change causes severe storms. We've had droughts, sea level rise, and of course, as you may have noted in the news in the past few months, cyclones and increasing frequency of big storms hitting the eastern seaboard of Southern Africa, and Madagascar in particular. This poses a risk for our food and water security, as well as the built environment and human health. The second category, of course, is the risk around the transition itself. The global transition to a low carbon economy has begun, and of course will continue. And regarding this issue, of course, Africa has reaffirmed that there can be no one-size-fits-all approach to the complex issues such as energy transition, due to the very different national circumstances and capacities of countries. In this regard, an enabling international environment that needs to be created, I think that's already underway, that is conducive to foster the just transition and support it, and as well as sustainable development, particularly in African countries and other developing countries. It should also be noted that the African Green Stimulus Program was developed and adopted by the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, also known as AMCEN, as well as the African Union, as an innovative African-led initiative to support the continent's recovery in a sustainable manner to the devastating socio-economic and environmental impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's worth noting that the African Green Stimulus Program also reaffirms the enhancement of climate action on the continent, as well as scaling up the investment in renewable energy for African countries, which are 2 of the 12 interrelated key priority areas for the continent's green recovery response, as central to supporting the continent's energy transition, as well as contributing to a number of other sustainable development interventions. Of course, South Africa has underscored the importance of participating in the technological transition that's taking place globally, so as to leave no one behind or risk facing redundancy and or non-competitiveness of our exports in a trade environment that favors goods and services produced in a low carbon manner. Our research indicates that the transition risk will affect major sectors of our economy, potentially, such as energy, mining, agriculture, transport, and manufacturing. Conscious of both the physical and transitional risks, and the decision by more than 12 of our major trading partners to commit to a 2050 net zero emissions target, South Africa's National Development Plan has a commitment to building a low carbon economy and climate resilient society also by mid-century. In this regard, we have made some progress at a national level. In the last 2.5 years particularly, we've put in place some of the architecture that's needed to pursue the Paris Agreement goals, including the nationally determined contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which was submitted to the UNFCCC in October last year, as well as looking more carefully at the range of the reduction, which has a 2-degree temperature increase as its upper limit, but of course we're striving for the lower limit, which is compatible with a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. Central to our government's understanding of the role and place of our transition to a low-carbon economy and the climate resilient society is understanding that transition will only succeed if it helps us to not just to address the climate risk, but also to address broader developmental challenges in a just and inclusive manner. In this regard, we've also identified the importance of the advancement of the green economy in the National Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan to the COVID-19 pandemic, which was adopted in October 2020 as a response to the issues at hand, particularly the socio-economic impacts that the pandemic has caused. And this sector, of course, can open a number of new investment opportunities and industries in the energy generation, mining, manufacturing, and agricultural sector, as well as to facilitate the realization of the country's broad objectives. Then on to the issue of the second aspect of South Africa's climate transition, which of course is the importance of addressing climate justice. This means that workers and communities in sectors most affected by the transition cannot carry a disproportionate burden because of the transitional changes. So we need to identify, of course, the transitional pathways and the processes which will affect workers and communities and how these will actually unfold and will be integrated into the broader development to benefit new industries, new enterprises, and most importantly, to ensure that no one is left behind. So in this regard, of course, we have the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Perception Survey, which also states that the least disruptive climate transition measures will be those that holistically integrate the needs of individuals, societies, businesses, and the planet. So I think that fits in quite well with South Africa's broad approach to the transition. Therefore, we cannot expect a sudden shift in economic activity, but this must occur in a conscious, researched, and phased manner over a defined period of time. Therefore, South Africa's just transition towards a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy and society must happen in a manner that does not impede socio-economic development, is socially just, and results in an increase in sustainable jobs. Equally important, it must be characterized by active involvement of workers and communities on which the transition will impact, both in terms of defining the objectives as well as the roadmap for the transition. We also, of course, have had the establishment of the Presidential Climate Commission, which has also been tasked with driving the just transition process, looking at the pathways for all the sectors and ensuring buy-in by all stakeholders. In terms of the national government's point of view, I think that provides a broad overview. We are clear, obviously, that one of the most important starting points for this low carbon transition would be in our energy sector. I think the introduction has underlined that. We need to implement the just energy transition. We also need to mobilize significant resources for this to happen. And of course, South Africa is very much appreciative of the offer made by a number of developed countries, which was outlined by Megan in the introduction, of the $8.5 billion US, which was announced at COP26 in November last year. So let me just quickly highlight 4 key points in this regard. Firstly, given our economic and social context and the current constraints on South African government and private sector balance sheets, it's unlikely that the country can transition without significant international support. And I think this is why that announcement at COP26 was so key for South Africa's just transition process. Secondly, in terms of the Paris Agreement, developed countries have an obligation as historical beneficiaries of high carbon emissions to provide support to developing countries to transition towards a low carbon future. Thirdly, the political declaration, which accompanied the offer, makes it clear that the pace and extent of decarbonization in South Africa will be determined by the financial resources and support that is available, recognizing and taking into account the socioeconomic challenges faced by South Africa. Of course, these have all been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Fourthly, and perhaps most importantly, the funding offered will be used for targeted programs of reskilling, upskilling, creating employment, and providing other forms of support to ensure workers, women and youth are the major beneficiaries of such a large-scale program as we shift towards a greener future. So therefore, in conclusion, the path that lies ahead for South Africa has a promising potential to support the achievement of a broader sustainable development agenda for our country as well as our continent through integrating the needs of individuals, societies, and businesses, as well as contributing to a brighter future for our planet. I think that just briefly are my few words, and thank you very much once again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That was fascinating to hear, the framing of the just transition in terms of the focus on workers and the need to pay attention at all times to the socioeconomic development of the country and this concept or need to leave no one behind. So now we're going to hear from the donor side. In the partnership announced at COP26, I think this was joined by the United States, the UK, France, Germany, and the European Union in terms of the donors that are planning to contribute. So today we have Annegret Al-Janabi from the German government, who's going to talk to us about the German government's involvement in this partnership and what the plans are for the coming months and years. Thanks, Annegret, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, and thanks for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to be here to contribute to this webinar. My name is Annegret Al-Janabi, and I'm working at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany in the Climate Finance Unit. And we have indeed been involved in discussing setting up the partnership with South Africa. We think it's very timely to discuss just energy transition and the role of partnerships for these transitions. The timeliness has also been acknowledged by the G7 in recent meetings. And the basis where we are all starting from is that we are committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement and the goals of the Glasgow COP last year. That means that we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and this needs a transition to a net zero economy and climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest. Including by means of accelerating decarbonization during the current decade. This requires ambitious mitigation targets worldwide, because climate change is a reality and determined action is becoming more urgent every day. An energy transition toward clean, renewable energy sources must be at the center of global strategies for climate action, as the energy sector is one of the largest carbon emitters in many countries. And this is likely to become even more common as energy demand in our partner countries is still growing. Simultaneously, we have to focus our attention on enabling economic and social development for all and the achievement of all SDGs, especially in partner countries. And we are living in a time of multiple crises, and a just transition is key. Having said this, it becomes clear that this challenge goes far beyond the energy sector, and this has also already been mentioned by the colleague from South Africa. While many countries have made a commitment to make their energy sectors more environmentally friendly, the challenges are in the need for significant levels of political will and ownership, funding, especially in the early stages of the process, availability of expert knowledge and technology, and finally, a comprehensive political reform strategy. Such reforms have to be socially compatible and show the way forward for human and economic development. Germany has therefore made this an issue we want to discuss under this year's G7 presidency connected to the Climate Club discussions. At their meeting on the 24th February, G7 leaders tasked relevant ministers already to make progress on concrete policies to effectively reduce emissions and on international support and engagement to partners beyond the G7, in particular towards emerging markets and developing countries, including through tailor-made just energy transition partnerships. That means that to start a dialogue with selected developing and emerging economies who are willing to accelerate progress and to go a step further. With these countries, we would like to identify how the G7 could provide support for requisite reforms, required financing, and social inclusion. Challenges, for sure, are different in each country, and thus support needs to be tailor-made. Developing partners may also need to change the way they approach cooperation and their own ambition. Scaling up private and public finance for high quality, sustainable and resilient infrastructure investments is key. We are therefore keen to develop the G7 Partnership for Infrastructure and Investments in such a way that it also boosts transition to net zero. The Just Energy Transition Partnership in South Africa, which was presented at COP26, can serve as a model. We will build on this model, even though it is clear that each partnership will have to be treated separately and will be differently. But what becomes very clear from the South Africa model is that the development and implementation of such partnerships needs a joint and a coordinated approach. And it needs more than a few donors to make energy transition a reality. Partnerships need to serve as an incubator for the mobilization of significant levels of additional public and in particular private funding. Financing in line with Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement will be a key element of the partnership strategy, as the requisite transformation requires huge investments, as we already heard from South Africa. National governments alone will not be able to achieve the goal of phasing out coal worldwide in a socially equitable manner. The emerging and developing countries have to engage with national resources. We need the support of the multilateral development banks, and we have to unleash the huge potential of the private sector. Significant financial resources will be needed to support a just energy transition. This means that if we want to implement the COP26 statement on international public support for clean energy transition, it will be key to make effective use of and refocus existing and additional financial resources. All national and international sources of finance need to be taken into account, be it grants, capital, or concessional and non-concessional loans. The multilateral development banks often play a key role in this. By making greater use of policy-based lending, especially in the climate and energy-related macro-fiscal field, the MDBs can put their strengths to use for the benefit of the partnerships. But there's also more, and there's also bilateral funding that comes in to complement, and it's as mentioned earlier, it is also in different sectors. So it's not only in the energy sector, but also in other environmental issues, on education, and on social inclusion. But we are requesting from the multilateral development banks to support the cooperation with ambitious developing and emerging economies. The goal is, this effort is to develop flexible, tailor-made financing and investment packages, especially for infrastructure investments in renewable energy capacity, energy storage, energy efficiency, and the early termination of operation of fossil energy plants. We know that we all have to engage and that we are only at the beginning of a process, which will hopefully lead to more just energy transition partnerships. And I'm looking forward to hear about implementation in South Africa and the ideas of other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annegret. Like you say, it has to be a sort of whole of society and economy approach if enough money is going to be raised in order to really bring about the transition, the wholesale transition that's needed. And the donors are obviously just one part, an absolutely crucial part in terms of leveraging the rest of the finance that's going to be needed for this transition. So now we are going to go down a little bit to the local level and hear a little bit how just transition is being planned in one of South Africa's major coal regions, Mpumalanga and we're going to hear now from Dudu Sivia. I think Dudu is now able to talk to us, who is the manager of the Department of Agriculture. So Dudu, if you could tell us a little bit about the work that's happened so far and how you're planning to take it forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Dudu Sivia from Agriculture, as they've said. But I am a provincial climate change and just transition coordinator in the province. Basically, thank you very much for this opportunity. But what I would really want to say that South Africa's energy and the major greenhouse gas emission contributors are coming from Mpumalanga. If you check basically it poses a lot of threat and challenges for Mpumalanga on water, air pollution, and land degradation. If you check Mpumalanga, basically, we have 85% of coal mine in Mpumalanga and 30% is exported. And if you check again, 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions of South Africa are coming from Mpumalanga, which actually pose a really threat because we are solely reliant on coal and it threatens the livelihood and at the same time, the well-being of communities in Mpumalanga, the workers and municipalities. The just transition actually, it's really necessary for Mpumalanga, not even necessary, it's needed. It's not about considering it because this is the province that will be negatively impacted. In one district, if I can mention in Nkangala, we have 8 power stations and numerous mines that are countless, that are functional and non-functional. So if you check basically, there is a greater need. And if you check Mpumalanga, Nkangala district, it is a sort of like a hotspot of the just transition where we really need to, not only as South Africa, but as well to say, what is it that we can do to transit fairly and just to ensure that the communities and the workers, including the municipalities, are still able to render quality services to its community. And at the same time, how do we cushion the works or the jobs that are going to be lost through that whole process? Because at the same time, you're talking about coal phase out, and at the same time, you're talking about the decommissioning of the power stations. How can we link that together to say, how can we ensure that we don't leave any person behind, but making sure that every person is participating effectively in this? So what Mpumalanga has done, we have noticed that there is that lot of misalignment at nationally, provincially, and municipalities, and go down to the communities. But at the same time, we are still talking the same language, but it is not being concreted to ensure that the people that are on the ground that are going to be negatively impacted are we have sort of kind of a mechanism of talking to them and understand what's going on in their space. So if you check basically with that, we have a lot of challenges as Mpumalanga currently. If you check Nkangala again district, the two municipalities, Steve Tshwete and Imalahleni, the population is increasing. There's a lot of people that are coming outside the country looking for the job opportunities, not knowing what is happening now with the decommissioning of the power stations, at the same time not knowing with the phase out of mines. Already there are mines that are closed, and then after that, we still haven't dealt with it. If you check basically transition is already happening in Mpumalanga. But is it just and is it fair? Nobody is aware and is not being done on that way. So in that manner, as Mpumalanga, we have decided to sort of like develop a just transition phase 1 plan to say what is the kind of status that is happening currently at our municipality level, at our provincial level, and then how can we link it very effectively with the national department and the other sectors and the social partners and the funders. And at the same time, how is it that going to benefit the community? Because whatever we do, we want to ensure that the communities, their livelihood doesn't change that much, and they have decent and sustainable work that is going to continue carrying them to ensure that the livelihood that they have, it doesn't deteriorate in that manner. So if you check basically, I normally say in my life, anything that happens, it happens with a reason, but at the same time, it presents its opportunity, the opportunity too. If you check basically, we have noted that in Mpumalanga, what we really need to emphasize in our just transition plan that we have developed, we really need to emphasize on governance, because we have noticed that governance is quite key in Mpumalanga. We have to have people that are accountable, and at the same time, we have to have the overseer of what is happening in Mpumalanga. So we want to establish sort of like a just transition working group that will be ensuring that it will be done, doing that. At the same time, reporting directly to the Premier's office. So the Premier's office will facilitate that. Why do we really wanted to do that at that higher level? We have noted that just transition and climate change is a political agenda now. We can talk as much as we can, but at the same time, the decisions that are made are politically. Administration is very good, but at the same time, politically, it needs to take a lead on that one. So with that, we have already started, because we have noticed that there's a 6th generation of the municipal planning taking place at a strategical level, at a political level. We are visiting the municipalities now to say, are you aware that there's just transition and climate change issues within your municipality or within your space? What is it that you are doing about it? So we are trying to integrate all this kind of element so that we can come up with energy, sort of like a economic diversification. So we have noted that we are totally reliant as Mpumalanga on coal. And if you check Imalahleni alone, is 45% reliance on coal. And was part of it, not counting the associated sectors that are linked to the coal in the sector or industry. So somewhere, somehow you could tell that it's going to have a negative impact in that way. So on that side, we are trying now to align all the plans within the sector of municipalities. We know that the municipalities are going to have a major impact with this just transition if it's not being handled correctly. So the governance, that the multi-level governance that we want to establish, we want to ensure that it looks basically in all that part to say, how are we going to go about in creating decent and sustainable jobs? How are we going to ensure that energy transition innovations are suitable for all the communities, and at the same time, the business that are within the area? And then the human health, as you know, that Nkangala is being spotted as one of the highest polluted area due to the activities that are happening, including the power stations. And at the same time, you look at the social protection and service delivery and public sector performance. Currently, we have noted that yes, we can go ahead. You can talk about locally and globally, but if the local, they still haven't comprehend what really needs to be done at a local area. Is their performance aligned with the situation that is happening now? If you're not going to start assisting them in ensuring that their core functions are being implemented very effectively, we'll be missing a point, because each and every challenge, it has presented us with an opportunity to start working together. And at the same time with the mine closure. And then after that, how is it going to be linked into the municipal services and everything that is going to be done at that local level? And at the same time,
I'm very sorry, may I interrupt you? It's absolutely fascinating, and I would really like to hear very much more detail about what's happening in Mpumalanga, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move on to the next speaker, because otherwise we're going to run out of time. Perhaps you can share more in the second part of the workshop. We're going to move on to Fabi Tumiwa now from Indonesia, and I think I just wanted to ask you about this point that Dudu was making around the impact on municipal services when, you know, a major mainstay of the local economy is going to be in decline, and how you replace revenues and how you maintain services. And also this issue of governance in Indonesia, because many people are saying that Indonesia may be one of the countries, especially as G20 host, that is in line for a similar kind of partnership that South Africa has embarked upon. So over to you, Fabi. If everybody could keep their remarks relatively brief, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Megan. I try to be brief. Before I answer your questions, I just want to give you the picture of the situation of Indonesia coal sectors. Well, we know that Indonesia is one of the largest coal exporter. I think we are the second largest after Australia. And last year we produced around 600 million tons of coal, 25%, around 150 million are consumed domestically, and 75% is for export. In terms of at the national level, coal industry contribute around 2.3 to 2.5% of our GDP. But if you look at the subnational levels, actually the coal industry contribute more, and that's actually the issue with this with the coal transitions. And coal has been a backbone of our energy, as well as a trade commodity in the last few years. As energy right now, 65% of our Indonesia electricity generate from coal, and governments, because of that, the government in the last few years actually subsidizing coal through the domestic market obligations. So our state-owned enterprise, PLN, similar to Eskom in South Africa, as they need more coal to generate electricity in 2010, 2012, government introduced this domestic market obligations. However, as coal price increase at the international market, and as the consequences that the coal, the cost of generation from coal plants increase, and the government has the policies to want to maintain the electricity price low. In 2018, as the coal price jumped, the government introduced this price cap. So no matter how much coal price at the international market, the PLN, our utilities, only purchase at maximum $70 per ton. It's being shielded from, for instance, recent increase of coal price at the international market. Not only that, as Indonesia tried to reduce fuel import, our national energy plans opt to utilize also coal. For instance, the government plan to produce the methyl ether to replace LPG, which also 70% of LPG we have to import from the Middle East. And another that currently being planned is the gasification to produce coal gasification to produce ammonia and brown hydrogens. Yeah, so that's the current situations with the coal, and we know that a coal in Indonesia is highly politicals, and as if we look at the current coal production, 90% of Indonesia coal is actually produced in only four provinces. We have 33 provinces in Indonesia, and coal produced in 4 provinces. And the largest coal producer is East Kalimantan, that produces around 40%, 40 to 45% of coal. So I mentioned that at the national level, coal contribute around 2.3 to 2.5% of GDP. But if you look at the subnational level, at the provincial level, actually revenue from coal industry contribute around 7 to 35% of gross provincial domestic product. And if we look deeper at the district level, which is below the provincial level, actually coal contribute a very significant number of local revenue. One sub-district, for instance, in East Kalimantan, coal contribute around 70% to the regency revenues. Other is like around 30 to 40%. So we can see that they are going to be a victim if coal demand reduce, and we have seen that unequal distributions as well in these coal provinces, and you can see that the number of poor people actually quite significant in those coal producing province. So if we look at the global energy transition, so as 75% of Indonesia coal for export, and we export to 60% to India and China, and the rest to Southeast Asia market and East Asia market. We look at all of this country is actually planned for energy transition. Either they would like to reduce the coal, and we look like India and China, they are as the coal importer, they also large coal producers. And so some estimations, estimation indicated that Indonesia coal export will be reduced between 20 to 30% by 2025 as a result of the energy transition. So what is actually impact? The impact of if demand for coal reduce? First, the impact is actually on the local economy, so lower gross regional domestic product, as we can see, and all these coal, based on our analysis, the all coal provinces will hardly hit if this coal demand decline in the next few years. The other impact also that we see is actually job and employment. Coal sectors, in our estimate, employ around 200, in total around 250,000 direct employment. So we estimate that the impact of between 25 to 30% reduction could slash around between 30% of a job by 2025, and even more in 2030 as coal demand reduce. But it's not only that, because at some local level, actually coal industries generate other economic activity. So indirect employment also will be affected. Demand of goods and services can be reduced, and therefore the employment at those sectors. We have witnessed this in the period of 2014, 2017, where coal prices actually decline, and we see that the economic growth and the job in those provinces are actually lower compared to previous period where the coal price is relatively high. The other
Abby,
thing,
thank you very much. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we just do not have enough time to be able to hear in as much detail as we would like from each location. But I think one thing that's coming through really, really loud and clear is that, you know, this transition will have a disproportionate impact within countries. So certain locations within countries are going to be hit very hard. And I think that this is something that policymakers are really going to have to grapple with in order to maintain the just part of the concept of just transition. So I'm going to cross over to Sretha now, Sretha Banerjee in India. Sretha, can you talk us a little bit through what's going on in India, if you see that there's going to be a similar impact on particular regions, and how, if at all, there are any efforts to kind of smooth out, you know, the effects of this transition, and also comment on what you've been hearing from our other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan, and thanks all for this conversation today. To talk about India, it's encouraging that the momentum is picking up. Like when we were there about a year back, there was a lot of skepticism and discomfort, I would rather say, to discuss a coal transition because of the centrality of coal in the energy mix, as well as and you know, the growth trajectory that is there, but also because of the politics around it. Because particularly in the subnational region, coal is the local politics is very entrenched around it. So even like politicians, local, businessmen, all have invested in coal, not just in mining, but businesses around coal. For example, one of the biggest one you will find there is transportation or other businesses. So there's a lot of discomfort to discuss coal, in fact. But the good thing is that I would say mostly around, like some research was coming up, and we have been doing that since late 2019. And also post Glasgow, right now, since the Prime Minister of India has put forth the target of a net zero emission target by 2070, but more importantly, some very ambitious renewable energy targets to be achieved within the next 10 years, which essentially means that coal has to peak if this targets are serious. And this is where right now the momentum is growing, because there are a couple of new things that has happened. We all know the complexities of coal in India, and I'll not go into that's so much first. But what is happening in the latest 2 months is that the Ministry of Coal has right now asked the biggest public sector undertaking, the coal producer, Coal India Limited, to start thinking of decarbonization processes. That's number one, which I think it's an important step. The second thing is there has been deliberations now within the Ministry of Power, which has also started to think of a 2050 pathway of slowly decarbonization. And then there are state government, like the government of Maharashtra, which has recently declared, no new coal-fired power plants. They are also developing regional energy transition plans and all of that. So the momentum is very slowly but growing. The challenge is that this is the good news. And in fact, the government of India, Niti Aayog, we recently released our report on Korba district, which is currently India's largest coal producer, producing about 17% of the country's coal. And the support of the government has been very, very impressive, in fact, of the state government as well. But the problem is that the discussion is still more at the upper policy level. And the question that will become important for India is that how do you actually implement just transition at the local level and plan for it? So we can plan something, but how do you go about actually implementing it? And this is one of the key challenges lying ahead because of the complexity of the coal economy. And I'm not even getting into the other fossil fuel sectors, such as oil. The challenge is that there is still no way that we all know formal workforce with the whole sector. And our studies are constantly showing that it is only a tip of the iceberg. The problem is with respect to the informal sector and the informal economy. Now, this informal sector is not just coal mining workers. It relates to the MSME sector that is around coal. One of the biggest studies right now we are also doing in some parts is the brick sector. It is completely reliant on local coal production and sell. Now, this is an economy that is completely informal, and about 11 million people all across India depend on it. It's just big. Then you have the challenge of coal washeries and the coal transport sector. When we did the study of Korba district at a granular level, the formal workforce in coal mining in that district was 18,000, and the worker who were just working as truckers in that district was nearly 17,000. Now, this is what we are looking at. And the coal transport sector has also a lot of migratory workers, which was not captured in that study. So this is the challenge we are talking of. Now, when India has to plan just transition, try to quantify the costs, try to develop welfare measures, you need a cost estimation to all of this, and for that you need the data. The problem is that we do not have the data quantified of this informal coal economy. In fact, even for coal mining workers, the last study that was done in this respect was 2009-2010. The complexion a lot of it has changed because of the change in mechanisms of how it works. Private sector has come in, which are working as contractors. There are many, many contractual laborers. And I feel in just transition implementation, there is a lot of work ahead that needs to be done now, actually at the local and granular level, and in fact to generate data also, if India really has to plan for it, because we need to provide the good, the example of South Africa is that it's only the $8.5 billion is for coal power. But still there was some estimation, and India has to come up with that estimation. Now, what the government is trying, and there are many avenues we have been in discussion with, talks with, in fact, I was in a meeting today like that, is also talks going on that how do we start estimating it? But frankly speaking, no one has an idea how to start about it even, because there are so many gray areas, like without a cost estimation of reskilling and retraining, who will require it, how many people will require it, how even you determine that. So what I would say is just transition, this is one of the challenges that we have. And the second bigger problem that India has to deal with, and we must deal with, is the inclusiveness and dealing with the political economy of it. Because these are poor people who will be worst affected. And these are the people who has also seen marginalization where the sector in fact came in the first place. So land, so alienation, displacement, livelihood loss, everything has happened. Now the challenge is that how do we go ahead and address this? So there are two levels. We need policy, we need clarity in data, and more studies to bring out actually how it is. And even government has to now come up with a roadmap to propose this, because we only have 30 or 20-year time to actually start doing things on ground. And then we need this local level. And one of the, when the invitation came, one of the things that was posed in, how do we bridge that local and national gap? Our own observation is that you need to develop local level institutions to facilitate the just transition process. Because the district government that is there, it's the sole authority which do not have the capacity to implement all the projects that are with them. It's a slim structure. For something like just transition, you need institutional support from the national to the state that goes into the local level. The second thing that will be essential for India, given the complexity of this sector and the spread of it, is to build capacity of local level institutions and local level NGOs. Because this process will take time and confidence. It cannot be someone sitting in Delhi or outside who can go and just parachuting. It has to be a process which slowly takes organic, which builds the confidence of the people. So I feel these two has to be done very deliberately. One is the governance, which trickles down to the local level, as well as a complete process of local support system, which can see through the process, build the community confidence, and help them to go through the process. Because we have a lot of people who are otherwise going to fall through the cracks.
Absolutely. So that's
where I'll stop right now, but I would be more than happy to take more questions.
Thank you. Yes, I hope that those questions will be asked during the second part of the workshop. Yeah, there is so much work to be done at the local level, clearly, but like you say, if you don't have the data on which you can estimate the costs and also the institutions in place to be able to implement and to act as a bridge between communities and the higher upper levels of government, then there's a high risk that people will indeed be left out. We're going to hear now in the last part of this panel from Latin America, experiences from Colombia and then Mexico. So I think we may well not have much time for discussion, but I think it's just really important that we actually hear what people are working on and their concerns, and the discussion can happen in the second part of the workshop. So we'll go next to Alex Sayer, who I think is on his way back from the airport, perhaps, who's going to talk to us about Colombia's experience so far of working on green transition and making it a fair one. Alex, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me really well this morning. So yeah, so the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change at COP21 on Paris Agreement decided that it was imperative to continue to improve the forum of the impact of the implementation of the response mechanisms, and adopted a work program focused on two areas. One, economic diversification and transformation, and the second one, a just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs. For a conceptual point of view, the UNFCCC assumes four dimensions in which the quantitative and qualitative impact on employment must be considered, derived from the reorientation of the economy towards higher levels of sustainability. The first one is job creation, the second one, job substitution, the third one, elimination of employment, and the fourth one, the transformation and redefinition of employment. So that is why Colombia recognizes the need to develop a job transition strategy of the workforce to guarantee that the transition to green economies and jobs is beneficial and fair for all workers, for companies, and for the country's global economy. This is why our NDC has incorporated a just transition goal for the workforce, and the long-term strategy that we call it E2050 also incorporates a specific commitment to the just transition of the workforce as a key to achieve carbon neutrality through of a sociological transform. So Colombia is beginning its journey to understand and build the just transition goal for the workforce, being a recent goal adopted with the update of the NDC at the end of 2020. It is necessary to mobilize sufficient technical resources to measure the path towards a just transition. There is significant challenge in the country for the purposes of the just transition for coal. Colombia has around 1,000 small and medium mining titles in Boyacá, Cundinamarca, Norte de Santander and Santander, which are departments here in Colombia. It is estimated that the new climate regulation such as the carbon tax or the emissions trade schemes or changes in coal consumption may affect and even close the operation of small-scale mining and around half of medium-scale mining. In addition, only 9% of the coal produced in Colombia is consumed internally, so the decrease in global consumption of coal will affect large companies. So in Colombia, different international cooperation organizations have been supporting the country with technical assistance in the preparation of research, knowledge transfer, and the formulation of recommendations for the incorporation of the just transition in Colombia. Most of these at the regional level. The cooperation could support the structuring and the implementation of a just transition strategy, which includes the different investigations, program, and initiatives, and the regional incorporation with the creation of quality green jobs. Accompanying the design and implementation of just transition of the workforce will be crucial to safeguard jobs that are vulnerable to climate change. So some progress has been made in the country in terms of research and knowledge generation that has allowed the identification of some intervention alternatives carried out by the national government with the support of cooperation in the coal regions that allows reconversion. Population dedicated to this activity without legal compliance and in context of lack of job opportunities, although this action has been not taken in the decarbonization scenario, they can be taken into account for all years. So the collaboration with between Latin American countries and international experience will serve to transform around 39,000 direct jobs that are currently vulnerable in Colombia, corresponding to small and medium scale mining. So that's the work that we have been doing here in Colombia. We are just in like the first steps into putting a just transition strategy. We have put it in our NDCs and a long-term strategy. So we are looking forward to continue work on research and developing this strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. Well, that's encouraging to hear that the research has been taking place and that there's an understanding of the types of impacts that are likely to be coming down the line, and that interesting to note that a lot of those impacts are going to fall on the small scale mines where some of those workers are likely to be vulnerable. So clearly a lot more to do though. Right, our last speaker for this part of the workshop is Ana Tamboro from Mexico. And so Ana, could you tell us about the work that's happening in Mexico, whether that is similar to what's happening in Colombia, and what are some of the specifics that you're looking at? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to confirm, can you see my slides? Okay, perfect. Yes. I'm just sharing some slides as background. I promise I will stick to the 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm going to speak about the coal phase out plans that we have been carrying out in Mexico from civil society. So I work at a climate change mitigation NGO, and we have been trying for the past few years to study the coal industry in Mexico so that we can better plan for a phase out in Mexico. So here, just a little bit of our highlights. The energy transition in Mexico has been something controversial in the past 3 years. First, there was a lot of push for renewable energies, but without the justice element to the energy transition. So now we're seeing a bit of a backlash for that, and now we're seeing a bit of a block to renewable energies and a little bit of a return to strengthening the state-owned companies, which are an oil company and an electricity utilities company, which mostly owns more polluting forms of generation, to say it in a politically way, a lot of they own the coal power plants. To put in context, our power generation with coal, which is a black slot in the pie chart, is only 4 to 5%. But of course, the emissions is the 11% of our sectoral emissions. So we see in Mexico something, a bit of a low-hanging fruit with the complexities of a coal phase out, but something that is relatively easy for Mexico to just reduce these emissions because it's a relatively small percentage of our power generation. And most of our coal power plants are located, like 2 out of 3 are located in one small space in Mexico, in Coahuila, which is a northern state within Mexico. Most of the coal mined there is used for these coal power plants. And we have another coal power plant actually in the south of Mexico, which uses Colombian coal. And so now that they were talking about the Colombian case, the southern coal power plant uses Colombian coal, and most recently it's been using fuel oil. So that is another international complexity. But here in the north, we use the state-owned utilities company uses coal that is mined right there. So it is a very small, geographically small impact area. These are the miners, and something that characterizes the coal industry in Mexico is that it has a lot of negative impacts for the coal miners and for the coal communities. It has been very hard to regulate the industry and the coal mining in Mexico. And we are a country with a lot of incidents and a lot of events where coal miners get trapped within the mines. And these are huge tragedies, and local communities are willing to move away from coal. So we are working with local organizations to start thinking of alternatives and to start shifting the coal identities within these small towns and communities into some other means of living. And they are very much welcoming these other alternatives because they see their families dying in the mines. Of course, it is complex, and policy and energy policy is complex in Mexico. I will not dive into this, but we can further discuss it. We have done within our different analysis, we have done like a health study, we have done the local perspectives study, and we've also done a financial study, which says that decarbonizing, just removing and substituting these 2 coal power plants, it's an investment of around 250 and 300 million US dollars. So this is not minor, and it's not minor for the Mexican government, but it is not impossible for the international community as an investment to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that this coal is producing. So I just wanted to leave this number here because Mexico, I believe, is a place where internationally we can invest in a coal phase out. And with this, I will just put again my email, and we'll continue talking about the Mexican case in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you so much, Anna. I think, again, it's useful to have numbers put on, the financial needs when it comes to this phase out. And then also that gives donors something to get their teeth into, I guess, when it comes to talking about climate finance and what needs to be channeled and where it needs to be channeled to. So I'm not going to, I'm afraid we won't have time for questions right now, but you can obviously pursue points of interest in the discussions that are coming. To me, just the one thing that came out so strongly from this discussion was the need to focus on how this transition is going to play out at the local level, and to actually get a better understanding of that, where the vulnerabilities are and how to address those, and really just to get going on that work as soon as possible, funding permitting. So exciting times, but also, I guess, slightly worrying, especially for local communities who are going to have to go through this transition without yet knowing exactly, how it's going to play out. So with that, and thank you so much, I'd just like to say finally that this discussion has given me some good ideas for stories that we might pursue in the coming months. And if you are contacted by one of our reporters, please don't be surprised. So thank you so much for all your fantastic contributions and different experiences. And now I'm going to hand over to Timon Wennet from the Wuppertal Institute, who's going to take you through the next part of the workshop. So thank you very much indeed, and a goodbye from me for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, and thank you for all the speakers and climate strategies for putting this together. I think it's been an amazing, rich view of the very different perspectives, from very local to global coal export economies and to informality questions in, as Shrestha put it, in India. I think it shows the diversity of the challenges in coal regions. Thanks for those presentations. My role is basically, I'll have the commercial break of this event. I'm just advertising a toolbox, which Andre mentioned in the very beginning. We as Wuppertal Institute have been putting together information on coal regions for practitioners in coal regions. We have been doing that based on work we've been doing for the EU in the European Coal Regions in Transition Initiative. But we've tried to make that helpful for practitioners, for people basically in the regions, so that it supports their work on developing a strategy, on developing good models and institutions for governance, what are future trends in the energy system, in industry, the big question of employment, substituting employment with greener jobs, with alternative jobs. As I said, this is just going to be an advertisement. I tell you, read the whole thing. It's a rich and heavy, but hopefully light to read toolbox. It has a lot of information, but I think beyond what is really the information we have put into the toolbox, we've screened many tools and reports and stuff that is out there by those people here in the room and people outside of the room. And our idea was really to help practitioners on the ground, to help you and everyone you work with, to navigate that wealth of information. So we've tried to really say, okay, what are resources? Give us short summaries so that you can see, is that interesting for me to read? Direct links so that you can work with it. And we've tried to collect examples of case studies from technical applications of new ideas, from how to bring in jobs, how to do finance, how to build networks in regions. And I think, I mean, and that is basically how I hand over to the next session. Despite all the diversity and very different challenges we see in coal regions, I think there is a lot to learn on the ground from region to region. And I think facilitating that exchange, or this is something we've learned, how does that relate to you? Can we build upon each other experiences? I think that is very important. And Shrestha said it in her presentation, building capacities on the ground in the regions is important. Our contribution is, hey, we put it in a report, but I think that is just the first step, and we need like first-hand exchanges. And with that, I hand over to Julianne, who will facilitate the second part of this workshop, where we have time to exchange and maybe share some ideas. And I'm looking forward to that. Over to you, Julianne.
Thank you, Timon. Hi there, everybody. I'm Julianne Hogbin. I'm Programme and Networks Manager at Climate Strategies, and I'll be guiding us through the final part of the event today, which is an interactive session where you'll have the opportunity to discuss the theme of collaboration and just transition with experts from around the world. Let me just get my slides into the right mode. So I'll get going straight away. So in the session today, we're going to be discussing 2 questions. And we'll be discussing these questions. Well, first of all, we'll be reflecting on them individually, and then we'll be discussing them in pairs and then in smaller groups. So the questions that we're going to be looking at today are: what are the key takeaways from the panel discussions that you've taken on the challenges and opportunities for international collaboration to support the just energy transition? And then the second question is, what tools and approaches to collaboration and cooperation do you use in your work to deliver the just transition? And we're particularly interested in how you're ensuring that those co-benefits are being realised. So you don't need to make a note of these questions. They will come up again. And you'll see them again, so no need to make a note. I know they're a little bit complicated. So just to talk you through how the session is going to run, we're going to start off by asking you to take just 2 minutes of personal reflection on the 2 questions. Just to take a moment to reflect on them yourself. Quite often in these types of events, we hear so much information, so much is thrown at us, but we don't get the chance to just take a moment to reflect on what we've heard and to bring that into our own experiences. So what we really want to do at the beginning of this session, we think it's really important, grab a piece of paper or a Word document and just take 2 minutes to do your own personal reflection on these questions and give yourself that time and space in silence just to reflect. We'll then automatically move you into pairs where we'd ask you to discuss the questions with the other person. Where are your answers similar? Where are they different? From there, so you'll have 8 minutes in your pairs, and from there, you're going to be moved directly into some smaller groups. So we're kind of in our, the workshops that we're used to being in person, where we have to move into different breakout rooms. This is the point where you go into your breakout session, and you'll be in smaller groups for 15 minutes to discuss the similarities and the differences between your answers to the 2 questions. Here's where it gets a bit complicated in the small groups, because we actually want to gather up what you've been discussing. And we haven't got time to go through everybody and report back in a plenary. So in the chat, hopefully my colleague Patrick's going to be sharing a link to a Google Drive document. So when you're in your smaller groups, not in your pairs, but when you've got into those groups of about 10 to 12, what we would like you to do is to assign a scribe, and for that person to just make a few notes on your answers to those 2 questions. And Patrick will be following that document, and he will attempt to summarise some of the key points coming out in 1 minute at the end of the workshop today. So, so please do take a note of your group number when you go into the breakout sessions. As I say, not in the pairs, but in the groups of 10 to 12. You should see in the top left of your screen which room number you're in. And when your scribe goes into your Word document, they can scroll down and find the appropriate section for your group. I think we'll probably end up having about 6 groups today, so hopefully you'll be able to find them. So here we are, here are the questions again, and they will be pasted into the chat. So what we really want to know is, what were your key takeaways from the panel discussion about the challenges and opportunities of international collaboration, and then to share some of your experiences of what approaches you use to facilitate collaboration and how you're realising the co-benefits of a just energy transition. And my colleagues will be, and myself will be moving around those groups in just to make sure you've got the questions, that they're in the chat and everything like that. So I guess without further ado, we just ask you to spend 2 minutes in personal reflection on your answers to these questions. And then after those 2 minutes, you'll go into pairs for a little bit of discussion. Okay, thank you everybody for taking that time. I might feel a bit uncomfortable to spend some time in silence during an event, but I think it's nice to be able to reflect on so much information that's been shared with us. So now my colleague Tim is going to start to move us into pairs, I hope.
Okay, perfect. So it seems that everybody's back now. So I've been following what's being put into the Google Drive, and there have been some quite interesting comments in relation to question 1 and question 2. So just to summarize, I think one of the key takeaways or key comments relating to question 1 is that there's a serious gap between regional and national governments, and that gap needs to be filled in some way, or it needs to be remedied, especially as it relates to finance and policy making. Secondly, that better information and data is needed so that initiatives are focused and targeted so that the money goes where it needs to go and that donor funding actually has an impact and is able to target where it needs to be felt. And then also the need to empower local government. Then relating to question 2, there were 2 key takeaways I was able to surmise from what was being said. Is that first is the issue of language and how concepts are communicated is important. That there needs to be accessible language so that communities, etc., are able to understand what is meant by just transition and also what it entails. Secondly, that there needs to be a better, that local government needs to be more supported, but also empowered, as cultural transitions are very locally based. Case in point being in Mpumalanga in South Africa. And then secondly, this was also raised in relation to question 2, maybe not the direct answer to the question, but something that was highlighted as important is, again, that there needs to be more information and data at the local level so that people know where resources are needed, what type of resources are needed, etc. So that was my very high level 1-minute summary of the input from the group breakout rooms. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I think we have literally 1 or 2 minutes left. So I just wanted to offer a few final reflections. First of all, I wanted to, I don't think we have the time, Simone. I'm sorry if you could maybe put it in a chat. That would be appreciated because we, unfortunately, you saw we already had to shift the agenda. Hopefully it played out well. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining. I mean, I know the competition is high of events nowadays, especially on the subject. So I hope we were able to demonstrate that this was helpful, needed. And one thing I wanted to say that we are planning to publish a blog based on the discussions and based on the input in the Google document. So that will be published and communicated along with the recording. And one thing I would like to say is that we hope it's not the last engagement. So we are hoping to engage more, maybe go a bit more into details, trying to create some sort of informal community of practice and to really go more into details of that collaboration on various levels and various topics to truly benefit from the richness of experienced types of stakeholders. So with that, I think I know how precious all our time of all of you is. So I want to thank very much my team, Climate Strategies team, the Wuppertal Institute for co-hosting, our funders, I mentioned the German Ministry of Environment and the European Commission, but our speakers, but above all, as I said, to all the participants for giving us your time and attention and for making, I think, this event worth our while. And thanks very much, and I hope to see you soon on various occasions. Thank you so much, and have a good day, night, evening, or morning, wherever you are.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.